Hi, welcome to our second lecture of the Fall 2024 lecture series here at the School of Architecture. And today we're very happy and excited to have here in the auditorium one of the most interesting emerging practices in Miami. And they're a young firm with young sort of principles, right? And it's exciting to see how the profession and the industry is sort of changing, and we see new faces and new voices and new sort of understanding of what this place is in terms of the environment, in terms of the climate, in terms of the programs, and how as new designers and architects we can approach different, the same problems with different angles more than anything, right? But we have a very challenging place where we operate as architects and designers, and sort of part of the idea with these invitations also to have emerging practices and young designers is to see how they're facing these sort of difficulties in terms of climate change, in terms of sea level rise, in terms of everything that is happening around the globe, and it's so strong in our city, in our place, in South Florida. I want to introduce Josh Eldridge, Maria Latsakis, and Andrea Cart from TROPICA, and give the stage to them. So please welcome them.
Okay, hi, I'm Josh, and this is Mari and Andrew. We're the three principals of TROPICA, and we're going to talk today about our work. And we're all basically a young office, so we see each other as peers, and I think we can kind of have a conversation about what it means to start an office, and we're very open to questions and any kind of input that we can help you all. We were not in your shoes very long ago, so we're still learning very much, and we really want to invite a conversation. So today we're going to talk about the idea of archaeology and how it informs our work. It's not, Henry, let's not go into the next one. We're stuck. The mouse, okay. Perfect. Okay, I'll just use this too. Perfect. Okay.
Now it's good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. So we see archaeology as a twofold influence for the way we make architecture. Archaeology is the study of artifacts through excavation of historical sites. But when we make architecture, we see that when we come to a project, when we come to a new client, when we are thinking about the context of the project, to us, really the process is about uncovering, revealing, and celebrating what is at the site, letting that really, truly guide what we're doing in a way that no two projects would ever look the same. In terms of life as an architect, we also think that that is really appropriate to thinking about who you are, uncovering your past, and thinking about, as an artist, as an architect, how you will contribute to the world and how that will affect the way that you live and how that you will inspire other people. So there are 8 of us in TROPICA. The 3 principals are here. And again, we're a very young team. None of us graduated more than 9 years ago. And we're very open to answer any questions you have. None of our parents are famous architects or developers. We basically started our office 4 years ago, and we were just outgoing people. We kind of advertised our skills. We found a client, and we created a team because none of us alone could basically do a project by ourselves. And so in terms of finding a first project, there's really no secrets. And we found that if you're very hardworking and reliable, that goes a long way, especially in a place like Miami. So we're going to talk in 3 sections here. The first is what we call the adventure of architecture. We'll show some overall work, and then we're going to zoom into 4 projects. And so these are some of the projects we're going to go into later. So, as an architect, we really have a unique opportunity to live an amazing life because it's very difficult as a creative person to make a living, but I think architects do have that opportunity to be creative every day and to basically form your life and your work around your interest and to offer that to other people. So going back to when I was in school, I spent a year in Switzerland studying at a school there, and this was an amazing opportunity. This was the first day of school. You have Mario Botta in the background there. I was super nervous at this beginning lecture. Everything was in Italian except for the welcome there. I was like, oh, great, they're talking to basically me. I was the only American in the room. But we had just amazing critiques, amazing different professors. This is Francis Kéré, an African architect who was building mud bricks in the courtyard of the school, and all these fancy European kids were getting their nice shoes dirty. And this was us, like in the dorms, all different nationalities of people. You can see on the cabinetry, those are little hands. Those were turkeys for Thanksgiving. We had this little chicken that we were celebrating, and again, I was the only American kid there. So basically being in this atmosphere of amazing European architecture, being around amazing professors. This is Eris Mateus here, playing ping pong. Eventually I met them and ended up working for them in Portugal for a year, and got to spend a time around a lot of their kind of lesser known projects. This is us like cooking a dinner, and eventually found my way to Brazil, working there for a year. I was around the gardens of Burle Marx for as much time as I could spend. This is a friend I met who owned a farm, and he was going around the world with his wife, picking up little seeds all over the world, bringing them back and planting them on his farm. Probably highly illegal, but very inspiring. And eventually, from there, I went to Switzerland, and all these experiences were kind of building on each other. I was getting very excited about learning about the world and experiencing different types of culture and architecture. And so I ended up at Herzog and de Meuron in Basel. And again, just the way that they presented their work in this beautiful courtyard, these huge models, incredibly inspiring. I had like a little palm tree because, again, I was very homesick, but we would float in the river to the office, and again, just incredible experiences. And I found my way back to Miami eventually, working on the very end parts of Perez Art Museum. And I met Mari and eventually Andrew here, and basically I got licensed. I took the Amber Book study guide, which I highly, highly recommend to get licensed. Do the Amber Book, it was amazing. Got licensed, and we got a project, and everything is, after that, has gone relatively smoothly. So back to the idea of archaeology, I think that it's very important to think about the fact that we are people first and architects second. All of us here want to live a good life, a meaningful life, and I think that we should not forget. I think as architects, we have sometimes this negative component of us that we get too obsessed with architecture. And I found that the best architects, the best artists are the ones that truly think about living and have a certain warmth and understanding about humanity about them. So as you're studying and as you're thinking about your future, I think it's incredibly important to define certain idols for yourself, certain people that you look up to. I always found it helpful to think who you're jealous of, what kind of life would you like to have? Because as architects, we're truly able to integrate our life, our practice, and what we have to say to the world together. And so these three figures I see as the most inspiring and integrated people. Monet in his garden, Louis Barragan, and Burle Marx. And interestingly, all three of them have a very strong link to gardens. One is a painter, the other is a landscape designer, and the third is an architect. And I think that each one of them, the way that they socialized, the way that they spoke, the way that they spent their free time, the way that they affected people, it's all very integrated in their ideas about life and ultimately what it means to live well. On the flip side, I think there are a lot of famous architects who get a lot of notoriety and recognition. This is Peter Eisenman, and basically this is a house on the right side. To very simplify what he was doing, I mean, overly simplify it, but he really believed in the ideas of geometrical transformations, patterns, and the ideas of architecture being played out to the point where they were almost taking over life. So in this case, you see a table. A dining table looks incredibly uncomfortable to sit at. But he would say basically, no, human beings, the way that you live in this house, it's kind of secondary. I want that the building is more important. And when I see something like from Monet, some of these other places we've traveled to, this is where I feel like I would feel the best. And I think as you're thinking about who you are as an architect, it's really important to think, where do I feel the best? What is most important, and where is the best kind of space for me to feel well? So from there, I think the next part is to really be introspective as an architect, to understand more about your past, your history, yourself. I think that artists are very famous for using their art to try to solve their psychological questions. A lot of repetition in the work that you see is maybe confusing. I mean, why was Monet painting thousands of water lilies? So in terms of being introspective, we really believe in finding a good therapist, writing. Like, these are things which I think are just incredibly, incredibly important as you define your life as an architect. This is a photo from Andrew's past. What did you do as a child that made the hours pass like minutes? Herein lies the key to your earthly pursuits. And this is an image that Andrew takes with him constantly. And here's me, like, very proudly harvesting a tomato, and from a birthday party, I don't know how long ago, but just, messing around in the mud, kayaking out there in the middle of nowhere. And these are images that we take with us because nostalgia is really the mainspring of your creativity. In terms of archaeology of the environment, we live in South Florida. South Florida is an incredibly beautiful and unique ecosystem. Obviously, we know about the hurricanes, sea level rise, all those components, but we also take it upon us to go out into nature, to understand where we live, to study the native plants, to understand the ecosystems, the different habitats. And we are not shy about publishing the fact that we are out having fun, enjoying where we live. We think that that's part of what Tropica represents. And we want to say that this is a good place to live, that we feel good here, and that as architects, we have a sense of what we feel is a good life. This is our garden. We're very interested in planting all different types of native species, experimenting with what we can do. These are basically all native flowers, which are attracting butterflies, and we think about this as just another ingredient to our architecture. And ultimately, working in the community, we have a lecture series which we invite you all to come to. This is one of our largest projects. We call this the Swamp Series, and we invite different artists and creative people from different fields to share what they're interested in, to, again, bring a sense of festivity to all the hard work that all of us are doing. So I want to talk about two projects which I think are both equally very interesting, but also speak to different approaches to integrating nature and thinking about archaeology in architecture. So on the left, a professor of mine, Valerio Olgiati, this is a house he did in Portugal. Some of you may know this house. It's on a hill, and he basically, I would consider this kind of architecture an invented architecture. He's basically trying to create something, a condition that people have not seen before, and that is totally almost otherworldly, and it has a kind of mythical, awe-inspiring quality. But this is something that he would, I think, talk about as an invention of his own mind. And it's an incredible house, but on the right is a project by Herzog and Demeron, which is a small pavilion in a garden. And the story of this pavilion is that underneath is the space where they have small gatherings. This was just a temporary pavilion, but the floor plan of the seating of this pavilion was basically an overlay of all the plans of the previous Serpentine galleries, Serpentine pavilions in London. So there's been one each year, and they took the plan, overlaid it, and that's just kind of how they created this seating area. And then, of course, the roof being this pond element, it's almost as if the building is part of the garden. It does not interfere with the garden in any way, and it adds to it in an amazing way. This was a student project of mine while in Switzerland, and it's also a garden house. This was created in a very dense suburban area, and the idea of this project was to basically surround the entire site with a wall to create an inner paradise where the garden and the house would intertwine. The garden would go over and under the house, but the spaces of the interior of the house would basically only be defined by the garden. And to me, what is so special about South Florida is the plant life, is the climate, is the quality of the sun. And so really, this project is about the architecture fading into the background, where the garden takes precedent over the expression of the building. It's also very important to understand the period in which we're operating as architects. I'm not going to go into this very long, but I could not recommend this book more to just speak a little bit about the current time period we find ourselves in as artists. And it's a very easy read, but it talks about how we make architecture today. And finally, in terms of the actual place that we're operating, the site, this is a project just underneath the Acropolis in Greece. And here, all of the facade are basically pieces of pottery and different buildings that were found from or near the site. And in this way, the expression of the building, its ornament, its character, is given by the architect basically arranging what was found on the site. I think this is an amazing idea. And in South Florida especially, again, the idea of creating architecture with stones, with plants, with green space, things that can become architectural, but we don't necessarily think about as a building, is a huge opportunity here because of the hurricanes, we have very strict regulations about what kind of materials, structures we can do. And so to be able to work with plants, rocks, stones, water, it opens up a whole new set of ingredients to add to this kit of parts. And so we'll go quickly through a number of projects, and I'm going to pass it over to Andrew and Mari. This is a small pool house in Pinecrest, and so we did the garden design of this project as well. It's about 1 acre. It's in the backyard of a project, and the garden is basically all native plants. We took out almost 80% of the existing plant life. The owners almost had a heart attack, but we kept the oak trees and basically created a series of winding paths and a small pool house in the background. The actual form of the pool house was dictated by 2 ideas. One, we wanted that the structural system of the pool house would mimic the oak trees and not stand out. So we, through a series of tests, came up with a kind of reddish-brown board-form concrete, and so that the actual walls of the building feel almost as if they're wood, even though they're concrete. And again, that's kind of an issue you'll see a lot in our projects, that we're trying to push past what is given to us in Miami as the typical building materials. Basically, concrete block is the most common. And here, of course, bringing in the wood, the kind of curved roof, the idea that where this came from was through mythology, through different histories. Basically, being in a garden underneath a very light tent was something that we were very interested in, kind of the most minimal architecture, that this thing maintains a very light, open, airy feeling. And ultimately, we're very interested in restoring the ecosystems which, are in danger. And finally, this is one small area of the garden that there was an existing shuffleboard court, and the owner was asking, how do we inhabit this space? We want to have dinners out here. And so we had an idea of basically creating 2 poles about 100 feet apart with a cable and then just draping insect screen on top of it to create a space. So this is another topic that we see a lot, is like how do we create enclosure in a tropical environment? What do we need? Do we need shade? Do we need water protection? Do we need to protect ourselves from mosquitoes? What are the tools that we can employ that maybe we don't need to employ in other climates? This is a large house in Coconut Grove. It's a series of floating platforms and gardens, and with this project, we're very interested in basically taking the roof of the house and making it an inhabited garden. And so this is all about thinking about how the roof is insulated, how the roof can be structural, but also provide garden space for the project. This is a townhouse in the south part of Coconut Grove. The owner was very interested in brownstones from New York, and the zoning of this project was very, very tight. Each unit is 5 stories tall, and we basically determined that the center part of this unit, we need to have a courtyard because given the ability to get light into this very long, almost like 100-foot long shoebox kind of space, we have to make a way for light and air to get into the center. From there, the idea of the brownstone, thinking about how we can use oolite, limestone, to give character to the building, was what formed it. So I guess I hope that I'm communicating that none of these projects are coming from much of what we're just sitting in a room thinking about. We're trying to simply react to what the client brings, what the site brings. This is a project also in Coconut Grove. Again, a very difficult zoning envelope. The shape of the building is basically given to us by the maximum footprint allowed to build. Again, that's a very common theme that we see a lot, that the owners want to build as much as possible. And in this case, there's a small difference between how much you can build and how much of the site you can expand to. And that's what led to this courtyard in the center of the building, again, bringing light and air to the middle of the project. This is a project that was actually a renovation that we're wrapping in stone, and the building was elevated above flood level, and so we're kind of coming in, wrapping it with oolite, and allowing the landscape to come up to the second level in a way that the architecture no longer floats above the floodplain, but still remains safe from floods. This is a project near Fairchild. The green are basically the critical root zone areas for some incredible oak trees. And I see that some of them moved there, but the pavilions themselves were only placed based on the buildable areas of the property. And so this project is in a dark concrete color to not distract from the oak trees, and it basically is just given, the shape is given by where we could build. Ultimately, we came to a dark concrete. This is in Coral Gables, and we just got through permitting, or review board, and it was very exciting because I don't think there's any other dark concrete buildings in Coral Gables. This is a penthouse, and so this one, basically when we arrived, there was an incredible amount of walls in the space, and the first thing we did was basically, let's take out every single wall, let's reveal the existing concrete structure, and then let's keep that as open as possible. So this is the design. We're using a type of blue limestone that is very similar to the color of the concrete. And ultimately, I think this is where we're going to get to. This is about halfway through construction. This is vanity, the bathroom. And so all these decisions were coming from the exposing of the concrete grid, keeping that open, and then letting the owner experience that. This is a small project for a development in Bimini. And again, this one is elevated slightly above floodwaters. This is a precast concrete structure that would be built off-site and then put on a barge to be assembled here above the dunes. And so the building touches very lightly on the sand, but is actually predominantly open with an insect screen on the roof, so that from this point of view, there's actually no difference, there's no wall between you and the garden. And so the enclosure of the building is actually at the very edge. So again, this is like trying to play with where is the boundary of the building, what needs to happen in a tropical climate to basically have a house. Okay, and then we're gonna look at actually 4 projects a little bit more closely here. So this was our very first project. We call it the Swamp. And this was a very old property. You have a lake in the southern part of the property, and there are two existing buildings around the lake. And ultimately, the owners were able to acquire two properties north of this area to build houses. So when we got to this lake, this is what it looked like. Completely infested with Australian pines, 59 massive trees. The Australian pine needles basically drop, they change the pH of the soil, and they make it impossible for native plants to grow. And so the water had completely changed color. The first step was to take these out. When we did that, we got to this point, we were a bit alarmed because the site was incredibly open, but there were these two structures on the property which were basically falling down. But luckily, the structure of them was relatively intact. And so, we're walking through thinking about how to actually deal with this. And as the first project, we said, okay, let's try to keep the structural elements of these buildings and allow them to inform everything else that we do on the site. So this is one property. This is kind of going to be a future living room for the family where they gather and have large parties. But you can kind of see the transformation that we had to go through to get this. And the mural on the project, the budget basically ran out. And we wanted to give a material to that wall. Ultimately, it wasn't possible because of money reasons, but we brought in this mural to kind of give the building one more element that would take it to more of a level of art than just a shed. And the black triangles came from the triangular windows from the pitched roofs that you see on the site. So there have just been incredible different opportunities to see how this place has evolved and grown. And we were able to bring in a lot of native plants back to this place. It's a very Everglades-heavy plant palette. And it's still growing in. And then adjacent to this property, we were asked to build two homes. And the budget was very modest for these projects. And so we were thinking, like, how can we create something architecturally interesting, but that also is inspired by the existing post and beam structures. And so we found, similar to the building here, the double T is an amazing opportunity to, we're inside, to basically create massive spans, to basically build very quickly, and to echo the post and beam structure on the site. And so both houses, we were able to convince the owners to build in this way and to build along a retaining wall which is existing on the site. And so the two houses themselves are very different in floor plan, but have a very similar structure. And the two houses work together. So in the center here, this is a roof stair that will be shared by both houses. And then this stair takes you down to the swamp. This house is a much more open, I guess, very typical organization of a home where you have the public space in one area and the private space in the other. This house, the owner was much more interested in creating a transparent axis through the house. And this axis ends in the stair. And so the two houses really work as one house, but privacy is maintained and afforded to each. And so this is kind of when the structure topped out. You can see the existing retaining wall. And it was very important for us that the house becomes part of that retaining wall. It's part of the site. And it looks like almost as if the two were built at a similar time. You can see the stair in the background, and ultimately there's a single one-story office for the owner. But as you know, the double T's, they give this chance to have these incredibly open spaces in the house, and this is the view towards this very monumental roof stair, the two-story office. So I'm going to give to Andrew. He's going to talk about an office project.
Hi. Hi. So I'm Andrew. The next project I'm going to talk about here, as Josh just said, is an office project. It's an office project on US 1 and Calusa Street in the North Grove area, across the street from the Daily Bread Market and the Metro Rail, and the underline going in under the Metro Rail. In the vein of trying to uncover what this building wanted to be, we were really fortunate to have an incredible client who, this office is for his personal company. He's a financial advisor. And they currently occupy the existing building on the site, which is really an old rundown 50s ranch-style house that's converted into an office. But the fortunate part is that he's very dedicated to the community at large and to design and architecture. So the principles that we presented him with that are really aligned with our office is also something that happened to be really aligned with our client, which it gave us a lot of freedom in terms of what we could explore here. Because one of the largest parameters when doing a project is often the client. Because at the end of the day, it's their project, and so you have to do what they need. But like I said, for us, we were really fortunate that a lot of things aligned here. So aside from the client, the other kind of really tangible parameters that we were working with was the site and the zoning. And as you can see from the site here in this image, we're on a corner lot, and the lines of the property are not parallel. So the building starts to meld and show the dysregulated lines of the site. And what we'll see internally too is that it melds because it starts to have more of a rigid and defined interior for the sake of functionality, but then it really starts to engross its own site. Additionally, with the zoning, there hasn't been a lot of development in this corridor, and likely because you're really limited on what you can do. You're limited to 3 stories and a roof deck, which is what you see here. The parking is really restrictive because you're right in front of a residential neighborhood, so you have to put a lot of parking on your site. So it's really not conducive for development in a standard way. But again, this client didn't really care about that and just wanted to do something really special. So given these different parameters of the height and really the parking having to be the entire ground floor, the project kind of wanted to be this elevated thing. We're not in a floodplain, so we didn't have to raise it like we're showing here, but the program and the zoning kind of wanted the building to do this. And so like Josh was saying, we're really trying to respond in the most appropriate way that we can given the different parameters that we're confronted with. So in thinking that way, we came up with some principles to start thinking about the building. Here's another shot of the building at night. And so we started thinking of the different levels. So we start on the ground floor with parking, which we call the rock garden. The second level, which is shared office space, we call the dog trot. The third level, which is our client's personal space for his office, we call the porch. And then the roof we refer to as the park. All of these things are born out of a lineage in South Florida. And that was really important to us when designing this project, was to really dig deep and try to see what a public building in South Florida wants to be, given the flexibility of being able to expand on as much public outdoor space as we can, because that's the other aspect of this project is with public buildings, for us as an office, the most interesting space is always the covered outdoor space, especially in South Florida. It's just prime real estate. And with a commercial project, you're not often afforded that luxury because you have to fill everything with money-making space, and public space is not money-making. But here in this image, you can start to see not only the different levels, but then the interconnection between the levels. So I'm going to show you a series of images now that go throughout the building. In this one, you can see the ground floor interconnected with the second floor and the third floor, again, showing that interconnectivity. And what I want to get to the ground level. So here, you can see what we're calling the rock garden. And it was really important to us to not just think of this as, it's an open parking garage, which you could just do at a minimal budget and call it a day, it's parking spaces. But what was really important to us, it was this idea that the ground floor really needed to be really wide and expansive to accommodate a lot of parking, which meant that the structure had to be really, really big spans, had to be really accommodating. And it also didn't have a very strong relationship to what was going on above. So it afforded a design that was more loose in nature. And in doing this, we actually take the idea of the rock garden beyond simply a garden and start to incorporate these pilotis and these concrete columns at the base wrapped in coral stone. So that really the building starts to become this primitive notion of sticks stacked on rocks, which we think it helps with the legibility, it helps with the understanding of the building, and it afforded to a more interesting way of navigating the bottom floor. So coming from the bottom floor, we come to the second level, which we call the dog trot. And the dog trot is an American vernacular housing typology, which is simply two living spaces with an open space, an open covered space between. But the beauty of the dog trot, again, in this manifestation, we're really responding to what the client needs, because the client wanted two separate rentable offices. And because of the parking restriction, we're only allowed a certain amount of square foot per office anyway. So based on these kind of parameters and using this deeper understanding of vernacular architecture and the lineage of South Florida architecture, the building kind of asked for this. And so here's another depiction of that covered space with the two offices on either side, framing looking southbound on US 1, and then here emphasizing the cut through all the way through. Next, we get to the third level, which is our client's office. Again, responding to what's been given to us, the program of his office was significantly more than the bottom floor, so i.e. there's more square footage, and ergo less square footage for outdoor space. But we're still able to try and mitigate this massive block on a property by introducing porches and having these more intimate experiences rather than large communal experiences. So the entry to the floor is like entering onto a wraparound porch, and then even from inside the building, this is the conference room, you're sitting inside a living room looking through a second floor front porch. And then finally, the roof deck. The client, again, programmatically had requested that we have a space for events. Very philanthropic, they throw a lot of, they do a lot of fundraisers and a lot of events, so they really needed a significant footprint to do events, and the roof deck just, you have a roof, so why not use it? So, but more than just saying let's just use the roof, to play with these different typologies and these different levels poetically, we refer to this as the park. And to differentiate it from the loose, organic rock garden on the ground floor, it's more of a structured and rigid programmed space, but it's still, which like a park would be, it's very prescriptive in terms of how it's laid out, but it's still open and free and inviting. And so that is the office project. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the next project, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Mari. But this project, that previous project was in construction documents. This project just started construction. Coincidentally, it's the same client, and this is his personal house. Also in the North Grove, he lived in a old 1920s Spanish bungalow. And in an effort to be really sensitive to the neighborhood, as he is very active in the neighborhood, and we like to preserve the character of these old neighborhoods, but we're also mindful of needing to evolve and grow into the next century. And as his family is growing, we were tasked with looking at a way to appropriately attach to this house, create a significant addition, about 5,000 square foot addition. So one project that came to mind is from a great book, Old Buildings, New Forms. This is Eric Gunnar Asplin's addition to a bank. And this method of creating additions to historically significant works where you're not bound to, or you're not a slave to imitation, we think is really rich and worth pursuing. You'll find in a lot of different municipalities, they actually have different philosophies on historic preservation. Oftentimes, one is forced to imitate, and municipalities don't want to see distinct differences between historical architecture and new architecture. We find that that's, just for ourselves, we find that that's not as rich as doing something like what Asplin did here in terms of identifying some important elements such as scale and composition and color, but clearly demarcating what is contemporary about the new building, so there's no confusion in terms of what's historic and what's new. So taking some of these principles, we employed a significant addition, understanding that this existing house is masonry, it's stuccoed, it has thin detailing, and it has a pitched roof. And to try to echo that rather than imitate, we said this building's gotta be masonry, but to make it feel contemporary, we articulated the tie beams and the tie columns so that it has more of a legible structure. But it's still a masonry building, still with concrete block infill. And then we stucco the infill. So it maintains this relationship of wood, the thin profile of the roof, the masonry and the stucco, but we find in a way that is contemporary, and certainly the scale is the clearest demarcation of difference, but we found that through this exercise, there was more harmony in creating an addition in a very complicated situation. And then next, we took the same thing inside. So Mari is going to talk about how that exercise went with the interiors.
Hi, so I'm Mari. I lead the interior design portion of the office, though I'm an architect also. And basically the idea is to continue these same principles of archaeology, both in terms of the building's exterior, the garden, the neighborhood, the history, into the inside of the building. So much of the building is experienced from the inside. I also personally love having the personal relationship with the client and interacting with these design elements that they interface with every day. Also, we find this to be really important to our office because, you know, every great building thinks about the interior just as critically, and you hear all the time like, oh, we miss the quality and the character of all these old houses. Well, like what those old houses did was didn't let those decisions just be default. They thought about them critically and really integrate them into the architecture. And I think that's also why they're timeless. It's not a style necessarily, it's very integrated. Anyways, so thinking about that, I think you saw on the first shot that there were these large oaks in front of the existing house. So the kind of ingredients on the site are an existing 1920s historic house in Coconut Grove, which obviously has this rich kind of wooden construction history, mainly by shipbuilders. As well, there was the oak that we found, like a branch that had lichen, which is that like greenish blue, kind of looks like brain growing on the branches. So that was actually our first material sample that inspired the interiors. So those are kind of the ingredients that we were looking at, as well as the character of the addition. So we basically took the notion from the facade and brought it inside, and then the material palette comes from the color palette of the moss that grows on the trees on site. And a big idea here too was just like the integration of the inside to the outside. A lot of times the interior is white by default, but that's not very prevalent in nature outside of the house. So we thought to integrate this really barely green color that is so prevalent on the outside, and it feels like it's white in the sense that it's a neutral because it's what the entire surrounding is. So having this kind of expression and bringing the concrete of the structure into the inside and letting that kind of accentuate the different spaces was a main idea here. Particularly also like little details. I think it's just my favorite thing to do, so I end up doing it. But, the kitchen handles are inspired by the shape of the roof of the houses. And so just thinking about all of those things as being really integral to the house, I think it's really important. And I think that that's what allows it to not be a style or from a particular period, but it's just integrated into the character of the home. The existing house had this arch facade, so we use that at the doors where the new house interfaces with the old house. As well, we brought in doors in this area. So the old house has more traditional doored, closed-off spaces where each room is individualized, and then the new space has this really open quality, which is possible because of contemporary modern structure abilities. So these are some images. Yeah, and then this is the old house, and you can see that the idea here is that the facade is mirrored in the molding detail inside and like a cupboard detail. It's the new house. Again, the idea of the triangle roof motif, all these things really excite me. It's the bedroom. And again, all the color palettes are coming from these different mosses that grow on the site. So each room has a different color, but each one is basically like eyedroppered from one of those mosses. And using a lot of natural, native, local materials as much as possible. So oolite, wood, these kind of things. And then this is a house, a renovation in Coconut Grove, which was done by one of the students of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think everybody is kind of already aware of the narrative of like these disappearing amazing houses, and particularly Coconut Grove, and then replacing with these white boxes. So this house had undergone some renovations, which left it kind of stuck in the 80s, and all the spaces were very divided. So the idea here was to restore it back and really highlight the original character of this home, but then bring it up to work with contemporary life. And with this one, the ingredient, kind of like the swamp, was this kind of post and beam timber construction, which is so difficult to do now. So that's a really amazing thing. So wanting to highlight that as much as possible. This is the exterior, and you'll see how we brought that into the inside. So I guess here you can see the site has these really big, it's kind of laid out in a courtyard you can see here, and right at the center of that black circle is a really amazing oak tree. So you feel like you're under this like forest canopy. So the idea was that instead of feeling like you're sitting inside a house looking at a garden, that you feel instead like you're sitting under a tree when you're inside, not that you're inside, separated from the outside. So we brought in this charred black floor, which really makes you feel like you're under the tree's shadow. And for the furniture, a lot of the furniture was sourced locally, vintage, antique, and thrifted, but takes a lot of inspiration from a lot of famous tropical houses, and especially some of the historic cottages in Coconut Grove, Vizcaya, some of the more famous houses in the neighborhood. So we were able to bring that wood character into a lot of places. And then particularly in the kitchen, basically what we did was continued the facade of the existing building, so the post and beam, into the cabinetry, so that it feels like it's really integrated into the house. And I just really love these little things, I guess, but I was so excited to design this custom handle, which was like glulam handles so that when you look at it, there's no handles. It's just this ambiguous kind of facade. But then actually it's a handle if you look at it from the side. And yeah, not all of the furniture these are all of our alto chairs, but the idea is that all the furniture in here expresses different times of woodworking. So whether it's like carved wood, maybe more from the 20s, or bent plywood here from, I guess, like the 40s. All of the furniture expresses like a innovation in woodworking in some way, similar to the like woodworking of the house. So that was how we came up with all of the furniture suggestions.
Thank you very much. We want to open up for questions or comments.